And we're going to have a moment's silence, but first I'm going to begin by reading the names of those murdered and wounded on Bloody Sunday. The murdered: Jackie Duddy, Michael Kelly, Kevin McLaughlin, Hugh Gilmore, John Young, William Nash, Michael McDade, William McKinney, James Ray, Jared McKinney, Gerald Donaghy, Patrick Doherty, Bernard McGuigan, John Johnson. And the wounded: Patrick Campbell, Peggy Deary, Alexander Nash, Danny McGowan, Patsy O'Donnell, Danny Gillespie, Michael Bradley, Pius McCarn, Patrick Crawley, Thomas Harkin, Patsy McDade, Michael Bridge, Alana Burke, Damien Donaghy, Joe Frail, Joseph Mahin, and Michael Kwan. And now we'll just have a minute's silence. Thank you. So now I'd like to welcome the Mayor of Derry City and Strabane, Councillor Rory McHugh, and invite him to say a few words.
Gorm agad agus a fáilte roh a leigh seo agus Chanáin Sasta a bhíonn seo fásta. Good evening everyone, and you're all very, very welcome. As Mayor of Derry City and Strabane as the Council, it's both an honour and a solemn responsibility to join you this evening for the Bloody Sunday annual lecture as we mark the 54th anniversary of the events of the 30th of January 1972. Bloody Sunday remains one of the darkest and most defining days in the history of our city. 14 innocent men lost their lives while peacefully marching for civil rights. The impact of that day has been felt not only by their families, but by generations across this community and far beyond Derry. Tonight, we remember those who were killed, we honour their memory, and we reaffirm our collective commitment to truth, justice, and accountability. I want to acknowledge in particular the families of those who were murdered. For more than 5 decades, they have shown extraordinary courage, dignity, and resilience in their pursuit of the truth and justice. Their determination ensured that Bloody Sunday was never forgotten, never rewritten, and never dismissed. Following last year's Soldier F trial, we are once again reminded of the emotional toll that legal processes place on families who have already endured so much loss. Regardless of outcomes, the family's unwavering commitment to truth and their refusal to be silenced continue to command the deepest respect of this city and the district. This annual lecture is an important space for reflection, learning and dialogue. It allows us not only to remember the past, but to consider its meaning for the present and the future, particularly in a society still shaped by the legacy of conflict and by the ongoing need for reconciliation rooted in honesty and accountability. On behalf of Derry City and Strabane District Council, I want to thank the organisers of this event for their continued work in ensuring that Bloody Sunday is remembered with integrity, dignity and with purpose. I also thank all of you for being here this evening to bear witness and to reflect together. So now it gives me great pleasure to formally welcome you to the Bloody Sunday annual lecture and to invite our speaker to address us this evening, Mitchel McLaughlin.
So we will now move on to our annual lecture, and we are delighted with the guests we have with us tonight, both strong supporters of Bloody Sunday families. Our first guest is Mitchel McLaughlin. Mitchel is someone who I'm sure you all know, but just to remind you, he is a long-term member of Sinn Féin and a former national chair of the party, who played a major role in the negotiations for the Good Friday Agreement. He was elected as an MLA for Foyle in 1998 and served until 2003, and then as an MLA for South Antrim, where he served from 2007 to 2016. After topping the poll in the 2007 election, during that mandate he served as a Speaker for the Assembly from 2015 to 2016. Mitchel will speak to us first, and then he will be joined in conversation by Colum Eastwood. Colum, again, someone you all know, is a former leader of the SDLP and is currently the MP for Foyle. He was previously an MLA for Foyle and served as a mayor of the city between 2010 and 2011. As mayor, he proudly walked with the Bloody Sunday families to the Guildhall on that monumentous day in June 2010, when we got the report of the Savile inquiry. A great day for us all. So first of all, I would like to invite Mitchel to the podium and to share his thoughts, and then we will move straight on to the conversation between Mitchel and Colum.
Well, to row of the leg from the show. I'm going to speak tonight about the road to Bloody Sunday in 1968 to 1972. I'm going to say first of all hello and thank you to you all for turning up, and to the Bloody Sunday families and the Trust for the invitation to speak this evening. A march from Coltúrlann to Dungannon on the 24th of August 1968 is widely recognised as the first civil rights of the present kind of history of this country. And in the north, clearly there was the Stormont government with a long history of gerrymandering the local kind of elections and discrimination against those of a nationalist and a Catholic persuasion. Those kind of instruments of discrimination were quite significantly powerful and were very, very difficult to overcome. The march from Coltúrlann was in particular important because it had adopted the tactics, or at least the philosophy, of the American civil rights struggle. And they set a model which was then subsequently adopted when the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association was formed, so that there was coordination and leadership right across the north. The issues clearly had been mapped out. The approach, despite the attempts to suppress the initial civil rights struggle, was a non-violent reaction. And it worked in some circumstances, but clearly not in all. And the early examples of the attempts to have civil rights marches in Doire, for example, were suppressed by the RUC, and not a bit gently either. It was baton charges and bloodshed, and all on the basis of an alleged counter-demonstration. That was the justification for denying Doire citizens from walking from one part of the city to another in procession and in calls for peaceful and legitimate reform. The 5th of October 1968 is the Civil Rights March that I referred to, and they had barely kind of gone 20 yards before the RUC riot squad attacked. And as I said, the march had been banned because of the concocted explanation, which was that there was going to be a counter-protest and a likely confrontation. In fact, there was no such thing, and the counter-protests and the violence came from the official police service of this very sectarian state at that time. But television reports and photojournalism from the event eventually kind of amplified the attack in the Derry Civil Rights Marchers' heads and across Ireland and internationally. Following the earlier civil rights marches, protests and sit-ins spread to other towns and cities across the north throughout 1969, with increasing tensions and political mobilisations on both sides of the divided community. The key organisers and groups within broad nationalism was the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, formed in early 1967, and the principal organiser of the 1968 and 1969 civil rights marches. The Campaign for Social Justice, an earlier group that publicised discrimination and helped lay the groundwork for Nicholas' tactics going forward. Local communities and civic groups in Tyrone and Derry provided on-the-ground organisation for the Cultúrlann and the Derry marches. The main demands included one man, one vote in elections, an end to discriminatory housing allocation, and reform of local government and policing. I couldn't find any contemporaneous comments on, from Bernadette Devlin and Neil McCafferty or Daisy Mules to another women activist on what they thought of the one man, one vote slogan, but I'm pretty sure they had an opinion. The Derry March on the 5th of October became the movement's defining moment because of the violent police response and the national media coverage that followed. The RUC had even borrowed a water cannon from the British Army to boast its ability to prevent the march from proceeding. That night saw a riot in the Bogside for the first time for many years, and between local people and the RUC riot squad. The IRA border campaign, Operation Harvest, had run from the 12th of December 1956 to the 26th of February 1962. It was a cross-border guerrilla campaign focused on the Irish border and ended after limited success and widespread internment. The fact that the IRA had sustained that ceasefire over a significant period from 1962 and was engaged in an analysis of strategy and politics was clearly an opportunity that should have been, it should really have been grabbed and it should have been adopted widely, because in that conjunction with the emerging civil rights movement to address many and manifest injustices of the Stormont regime, surely this was an example of an embryonic peace process that deserved to thrive and to be supported. But the fact that the IRA was on ceasefire for such a long time did not prevent the Stormont government and unionist organisations and loyalist organisations from citing the IRA's justification for the repressive laws. Instead, however, internment was reintroduced in the North on the 9th of August 1971, and this decision was taken by Stormont Prime Minister Brian Faulkner with the consent of the British government, triggering mass arrests and widespread unrest. On the morning of the 9th of August at 5 a.m. in the morning, 600 soldiers from one paratroop regiment moved into the Ballymurphy estate in West Belfast. Their stated objective was to enforce internment and suppress expected resistance. House raids, arrest and violent confrontation began almost immediately. Over a 3-day onslaught, one para shot and killed a total of 11 civilians. And just to explain, one para is a descriptor that the British government uses for the parachute regiment and particularly their assault section. They killed a total of 11 civilians in Ballymurphy, including a woman and a parish priest who was administering the last rites to a dying man. To underline the fact that the IRA discipline had held up and commitment to community-based responses, not a single paratrooper suffered gunshot wounds during this operation. However, Captain Dixon, of fame and renown in this city, he issued a claim of self-defence, again with a shot list, claiming that they only responded to attacks by Republicans. Over the ensuing period, the British Army, supported by the RUC Special Branch, conducted many raids, exclusively in nationalist areas, across the north, including Doire, and estimates indicated that several hundred men had been arrested and interned. That number increased to over 350, including 17 women internees over the following months. As widespread protests about internment spread within the broad nationalist community throughout the north, information began to emerge of the torture inflicted on the internees, and they were utilising kitchens, interrogation and depth techniques which he had perfected in Kenya and other places, and which included sensory deprivation, denial of sleep, waterboarding, constant beatings by paratroopers. And throughout this ordeal, several internees were also subjected to hooting, which intensified the experience of helplessness and isolation, and consequently, most of those victims suffered lifelong trauma from that point onwards. McGilligan, Saturday the 22nd of 1972, was my first encounter with the paratroop regiment. This was a NICRA march to protest internment at the McGilligan prison camp, and it was supported by many from Doire. The paratroopers, placed again in a public order role, before we got as far as the prison gates, attacked the peaceful marchers on the beach. Baton charges, rubber bullets and brutality followed as the paras attacked the marchers. No justification in terms of threat or violence from the marchers. Public anger surged in Doire and beyond. The historical significance. McGilligan was widely described as a rehearsal for the upcoming civil rights march in Doire, and demonstrated the regiment's aggression towards peaceful civil rights demonstrators. Bear in mind, this is just a week before Bloody Sunday. What was particularly shocking was the government's willingness again to use and to continue to use the paras in public crowd control situations. The growing sense in the nationalist community was that the paras and their political masters were actually looking for confrontation. They wanted to turn a peaceful civil rights campaign into a violent and in their descriptor, sectarian conflict between unionists and nationalists. The vicious assault on an entirely peaceful civil rights march on the internment camp was my first contact with the British paratroopers. Swinging their SLR rifles by the gun barrel, they clubbed marchers and drove them into the shadows of Loch Foyle. Many suffered quite severe head injuries as a result. Footage of that assault further inflamed public anger and directly shaped the atmosphere leading to the 30th of January march in Doire. My second experience of the paras was on Saturday, the 29th of August 1972, at a Buncrana Road checkpoint. The day before, obviously, what was to become internationally known as Bloody Sunday. Myself, John Shields and Harry Devaney had travelled to Buncrana to play a round of golf, and also to collect the Volunteer, which was a community bulletin that was a successor of the bulletin, the barricade bulletins that had been produced during the Free Doire era. And the paratroopers, when they found that, and particularly when they opened it up and saw the war section, they kind of lost their sense of humour. And the people will remember what happened to Harry Devaney's father, Sammy. He had suffered a horrific beating in his William Street home by an RUC riot squad on the 19th of April, '69, and his death on the 17th of July, 1969 is widely regarded as one of the first fatal incidents of the Tour. So when we were stopped at the checkpoint, it quickly became very fraught when the soldiers identified themselves as paratroopers. And they did so in a way of actually slagging off the other regiments that were deployed across the north and describing themselves as super squaddies. All three of us were forcibly spread-eagled against the hot engine coil of the Saracen personnel carrier. Our faces and hands were held against the hot plate armour of the vehicle. However, about 10 or 15 minutes later, two local politicians, Woolley O'Connell and Ivan Cooper, arrived and eventually brought that incident to a close. And I was never as glad to see the SDLP. I was among those who marched from Cleggan to the army barricade in Lower William Street to protest at the ban on marching to the Guildhall Square. While stones and bottles were being thrown by a small group of rioters, the sound of army vehicles signalled that the army was on the move behind their own barriers, and then further movement was happening behind us at the junction of Little James Street and William Street. Most of us retreated along Chamberlain Street. At the junction of Eden Place, I passed a tall man festooned with cameras, obviously a professional photographer, but also obviously under some threat and with his hands in the air. I subsequently discovered that this was Gilles Perez, a famous French photojournalist. I thought it strange that he was in such terror and in such thrall, and I went back to see what was going on, and I called on him to kind of move towards me, but he wouldn't, or he couldn't move. I took a quick glance into Eden Place and saw a soldier crouching on the diagonal corner. I immediately pulled back and called again on Gilles to step towards me when a shot rang out. I was safe enough where I was and assumed that the shot had been directed towards Gilles Perez, who suddenly rediscovered his legs and feet. Both of us took off at full speed towards the car park in Roswell Flats. When we got into the open space behind the flats, I saw at the corner of the flats a group of civilians tending to a young man, Jackie Doire, who was a neighbour of ours from Central Drive and who had been shot and fatally wounded. Just in front of me, Michael Bridge was berating the soldiers who had shot young Doire. The four soldiers were facing into the open space of the area of the flats. One of them, almost casually, raised his rifle and shot Michael in the leg. One thing about that scenario, these soldiers who had stepped out of the relative safety of the Saracen were obviously not concerned about being shot at by anyone. Two questions have bothered me ever since about this sequence of events. If the shot fired at Eden Place was aimed at Gilles Perez, as I initially assumed, how could the shooter have missed at that range? Some days later, a journalist from the Sunday Times Inside team, who had been sent over to Doire to report on the Bloody Sunday massacre, and who had interviewed me on the basis of a statement I had given to Bridget Bond of the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association. They took a view that I was the intended target, as their investigation had discovered that the bullet was fired diagonally across the junction and had damaged a cove bridge over the window of the first house at the corner of Harvey Street and Chamberlain Street. But this crucially was fired, this shot was fired some minutes after I had stepped away from the corner. I could not have been the target because he couldn't possibly have seen me some steps back from the corner. And Gilles Perez was also not the target. And that raises a question in my head that has been there for many years. What was the actual purpose of that shot? And was it just a coincidence that ongoing volleys of shots were now reverberating around the bogside? I've always wondered and worried that that shot was a signal. 10 minutes of murderous paratrooper rifle fire and Captain Jackson's prefabricated shot list designed to conceal the truth and justice. Contemporaneous kind of timelines and later investigations agree that the killing took place over roughly a 10-minute window, which seems incredible given the catastrophe outcome. Ballymurphy, for example, 5 months earlier, happened over a 3-day period by the same parachute regiment, during which 11 local people were shot dead. According to RTE's detailed chronology of the day, in 10 minutes 13 people are shot dead and a 14th dies later. The timeline refers specifically to the period after the paratroop regiment entered the bogside and began firing live rounds at fleeing and sheltering civilians. The Northern Ireland Civil Rights March on the 30th of January had been peaceful until the marchers realised that the army had blocked their route to the Guildhall Square. Up to that point, the march had been good-tempered, and the march stewards agreed to turn right and proceed directly to Free Dairy Corner, apart from at most 100 youths who went down to the army barricade and threw stones. After one party advanced into Russell Street, the situation escalated rapidly. The lethal firings phase, during which all the fatal injuries occurred, was extremely compressed, contributing to the chaos and the inability of civilians to escape. The short, intensive bursts of gunfire was central to the Savills inquiry conclusion that none of the victims posed a threat and that the soldiers' actions were justified. The brevity of this assault also underscores how quickly the day turned from a civil rights demonstration into a mass casualty event. The Sunday Times Inside team, comprising senior reporters and photographers, were tasked to develop an in-depth report, collecting statements from witnesses and survivors. However, the report was suppressed by the British government and, to my knowledge, was never published by the newspaper. The connection between internment in August 71 and Bloody Sunday on the 30th of January 1972 isn't just a loose historical thread, it's a direct causal claim or chain. Once you lay the pieces side by side, the escalation becomes almost inevitable. The 9th of August 1971 created the political and military conditions that led directly to Bloody Sunday. Internment shattered any remaining nationalist belief in Stormont and the British government. When Faulkner introduced internment on the 9th of August, the policy was one-sided only. Republicans and nationalists were arrested, poorly targeted, as many detainees had no paramilitary links whatsoever, accompanied by violence, Ballymurphy crimes, mass raids and beatings, etc. For the national community, this confirmed Stormont was not governing for them. The British government was never a peacekeeping force. The state was now an active threat. The collapse in trust in the political backdrop to Bloody Sunday, internment triggered as a surge of street protests. The civil rights groups reorganised. NICRA, the Civil Rights Association, regained momentum. Mass marches reappeared despite bans. The most important developments, anti-internment marches, became the central form of protest. Derry became the symbolic heart of resistance, and the much planned for 30th of January 1978 was part of this wave. The internment massively strengthened the IRA, and this is one of the most widely acknowledged consequences. Internment radicalised thousands of young nationalists, filled the prisons with people who, when released, came out more politicised and militant, created a sense that peaceful protests had failed, increased recruitment for the IRA dramatically. By late 1971, the IRA was more active than ever. The British Army was under pressure. Unions, politicians demanded tougher measures. The Army's attitude hardened after August 71. The rising conflict shaped the British Army's posture in Derry. Internment had changed the British Army's operational mindset, and they shifted from peacekeeping to counterinsurgency. Derry, especially the Bogside, was treated as a hostile zone. Paratroopers were deployed increasingly for aggressive crowd control. By 1972 January, the British Army leadership believed civil rights marches were a cover for AR activity. The Bogside needed to be reasserted. A show of force would break the protest movement, and this is the logic that put the 1st Paratroop Regiment on the streets of Derry on Bloody Sunday. Stormont's authority was collapsing. Internment was supposed to save Stormont. Instead, it deepened the crisis, undermined Faulkner's credibility, increased London's doubts about local control. By early 1972, Stormont was hanging by a thread. London was preparing for direct rule. Faulkner was desperate to show that he could still manage security. The political pressure fed to the decision to allow a hardline military response to the Derry March. The January 1972 march was a direct protest against internment. This is the most literal link. The North, on the 30th of January 1972, was organised. The march was organised by NICRA, was explicitly an anti-internment demonstration, was banned by the government, was intended to be peaceful, and was expected to draw thousands. The Army's mission was to stop the march reaching the Guildhall, and the 1st Paratrooper Regiment's mission was to arrest large numbers of protesters. And the killings happened during that arrest operation. The chain of causation is one line: internment, mass protests, Army hardening its position, political panic, Paras deployed, and Bloody Sunday. Every major historian from Saville to contemporary scholars recognises this sequence. And why this matters: Bloody Sunday wasn't a sudden eruption. It was a culmination of a failed security policy, a collapsing political system, a community pushed beyond breaking point, a military force operating with the wrong mandate, a protest movement that refused to be silenced. August 71 is a hinge on which the whole story hinges. During the reintroduction of internment without trial, because of persistent lobbying by the Unionist government, the British government supported the RUC, a special branch exclusively conducted raids in nationalist areas, and as I've spoken earlier before, it did have the effect of showing just how lopsided and one-sided the so-called justice system was. Amid widespread protests about internment within the broad nationalist community, information about the abuse enraged sentiments, and I think in many ways concretised the commitment that people had made to the need for reform and the need to have quite significant, almost revolutionary change. However, my contact with the paratroopers on Bloody Sunday itself was the third in 7 days, and my belief is that they could not have picked a more wrong kind of regimen to try and kind of deliver. What started off, I suppose, as a half-baked hearts and minds strategy that had no kind of foundation and no support on the side of the Unionist government. But when we kind of think about the consequences of that kind of change of direction, it also had the effect of changing the role and the purpose of the civil rights movement, which was about trying to kind of run reforms, trying to kind of end discrimination in employment and education and housing and all the different ways in which the electoral system had been gerrymandered. But it changed it from that to a protest movement against repression and British repression in Ireland. So I think that in the context of where we are now, what we see is quite significant opportunities starting to shape up and form, and the impossibility of the Unionist community ever again achieving that type of hegemony that they had in the 620s. Demographically, that has changed, and I think the key thing for nationalists perceiving a different kind of future, particularly for the younger generation of people in Ireland, have to be very much on their guard, not to carry the resentments of that whole kind of period of repression and resistance to change and violence from the state. We've got to kind of find a way of negotiating the future with those who share the island with us, even in the circumstances of either past history or their current kind of cultural affiliations. So I think that when we talk about all of those things, we can revisit the optimism and the confidence that was there at the start of the civil rights campaign. If we were naive in terms of the lengths to which not just the Unionist government would go, but that the British government was prepared to go to preserve their domination over Ireland, then we will have learned those kind of lessons and hopefully apply those lessons. And just finally, I think that I can share with you the name of the last prisoner to be released when the British at last leave Ireland. And the name of that prisoner is Truth. Thank you very much.
One thing about this weekend that I think we always do well is that, yes, we talk about the past, but we show solidarity with people across the world, but also we talk about the future. And towards the end of Mitchel's lecture, he very clearly pointed in the direction of where many of us think we're going. I think a lot of us think that things have changed utterly, but that we can't be passive in that conversation or that process. a sort of an open-ended question, maybe, Mitchell, is where do you think we are in terms of the journey towards unity?
Well, I think, I mean, as you describe it, I would think that we are actually on the cusp of a significant opportunity. I wouldn't put it any further than that until some of the groundwork has been prepared. I see our role in the reasonable kind of future for the Irish government and politicians in Leinster House joining this conversation. But I think that an interesting thing that I have been observing for some time now is that I am convinced that there's actually more dialogue and discussion within the unionist community about the potential of United Ireland than there generally is within our own community. I think there's a certain complacency which I would guard against and warn against. There is a lack of engagement, and we really do need people with ideas, and everybody has ideas and contributions to make. I think that ourselves, I think the SDLP and Sinn Féin found it important to collaborate and cooperate on the peace process. And I think that there is another, tipping point moment, in my view, in the early 2030s. And I think that our two parties have to be given a lead and perhaps helping the Irish government to understand their key role in giving assurance, setting out the offer, if I could put it that way, that unions can debate. Because at the moment, in the lack of that kind of hard and authoritative information, they are probably imagining a revenge kind of scenario opening up where they lose the ability to kind of set the agenda and to control the agenda.
So there's a lot in that in terms of where unionism is, but also where nationalism is, and I think you're right. One of the things that I think is definitely happening is that we're talking more about unity, and Brexit has probably created that momentum, but I think we're almost doing it adjacent to each other rather than with each other. And actually, this city is where, and you were intimately involved in this, is where discussions that led to a kind of a national movement for peace and that ended up in the Good Friday Agreement began. And without the northern element of that, so at that time Sinn Féin and the SDLP, we wouldn't have had Dublin involved in the way that they became involved. And do you think we're kind of in that situation now where we have a lot of talk, particularly up here, but we don't seem to be getting that coming back from Dublin? And my view is that's on us to make that happen and to encourage them. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, I think that kind of spells it out. The essential thing is that within the nationalist parties, North and South, and particularly Sinn Féin being engaged in electoral politics in the South, that has its own chemistry. And that may well impact on our ability to find common ground on what I think is the key strategic endeavour. And I think it's in everybody's interest that we encourage those voices that's emerging from within traditional unionism, who have embraced the idea of change, democratic change, change that is buttressed by written guarantees, written constitutions, etc., and a human rights kind of agenda. I think we will find more and more of that. I mean, Ben Collins was in this city, and I was talking to him at an event where he was launching his book. He was from a very, very staunch unionist background. Brexit broke him. But this guy is a highly skilled technocrat. He had worked for the British government in very senior positions, understands the economic kind of issues, understands social and economic policy, is actually quite an expert on it. And he is absolutely forthright about the direction of travel. I suppose frustrated that broad nationalism hasn't addressed the issue of confidence building of the those within the unionist community who can cope with the process of change. one that's honest and one that offers them the kind of reassurances that they want. And, you know, I think our two parties may have to kind of reprise the early engagements that we had, that ultimately led to Dublin getting involved and ultimately, ironically, the British government getting involved. So, I mean, there is a direction of travel here, I think, opening up, but I think that we need to move in the direction of in getting the attention of the Irish government, because their key and crucial role is because like they have the overall picture of the social and the economic well-being of the economy, etc. And it's up to them to kind of set out what guarantees unionists can ask for and expect.
See, I think, well, first of all, you should buy Ben's 2 books. I think he's got 2 books now. They're fantastic and technical and important, because sometimes we're very good at talking in the sort of ideological, and we don't always get into the nitty gritty of what needs to actually happen. But I think that's 100% right, that unionism is going to find it very hard to engage if Dublin aren't engaging. But I also think there's a natural kind of instinct from us in the north to want to kick Dublin, when actually if we want to create a movement, we can't be throwing people overboard, you have to bring them on board. And what we've learned over decades is that without the Dublin government, we're not going to get anywhere. And there is a conflict and a difficulty when it comes to the fact that we all run for election against each other, and Sinn Féin in the Dublin South in opposition. I think that's all very manageable though, because, you know, when John and Hume and Jerry Adams were speaking to each other, it was a lot worse. It was a lot more difficult. You know, things were happening that were seemingly impossible to get over. But I just think we need to find a way to encourage Dublin to get involved, so that we can then have a proper conversation with unionism and London.
Well, I think that you know, your point about empowering people to participate and to speak out and maybe even to think aloud was one of the key kind of breakthroughs. You know, it became suddenly okay to talk about a United Ireland, and you weren't kind of switching sides, or you weren't going to be accused of being a closet this, that or the other. My sense of it is that there is an enormous network of contacts across the community, despite the divisions that exist. Our weak spot is that there is no one in the north, and including myself here, even though I'm a retired politician, you don't actually have authoritative and verifiable information to be able to kind of engage until the Irish government puts those kind of...
the civil service need to be sort of...
Well, I happen to know that they're already at that work, but it's been very closely guarded by Mitchel and company, and I think they do need to be encouraged to broaden the scope of that conversation, if only to widen the net and to bring more unionists into the conversation, because I think there are unions out there who, if they get the opportunity and the invitation, will be part of it.
I'm not going to mention your age, but you've been doing this a good while.
What age am I? I can't remember.
So I think a lot of us are frustrated, clearly, because we can see the potential. We can see it's not that far away. We can see that unionism is, freaking out, frankly, and we're going to end up having to help them and calm them down and make them feel comfortable with what's coming next, and that's not our natural reaction, but we're going to have to do that. In your view, given all that you've seen and been involved with, how far away do you think we are from Dublin properly engaging politically?
Well, I think we're already late. I do think it should have happened already, but it hasn't happened already. That's the reality of it. I think if we just look at the signals, both north and south of the border, in terms of, say, the racial tensions that's emerging, that the right wing seems to be growing nearly exponentially in relation to the status in terms of either the intellectual kind of pursuit of agreed kind of policies, or the practical kind of implementation of what the Irish government have clearly been calculating about for some time. Now that is down to, I think, a misguided sense of party politics and loyalty, when in fact there is a strategic reason why this process should be as transparent and as accessible as possible. It would take very little to tip the existing balance in demographic terms to win a referendum in the North. But you'll not do that if the people that you want to draw into that conversation don't have enough information to justify them taking the risk.
See, I don't think they know us, and we don't really know them. And I'm not talking about unionism, I'm talking about Southern nationalism and Northern nationalism, because we've kind of grown apart. We don't like to admit this, but we're like the kind of orphan child, assuming we know everything that's going on down there. We're just disconnected and different, and that I think right now is creating a bit of a void in what needs to happen, and we're going to have to find a way of helping them jump into the void.
Yeah.
In terms of unionism, I think, and you've seen some of the outbursts, and we're not kick Gavin tonight, we've plenty of time for that over the weekend, but where do you think they're at? Because it strikes me that they're in sort of purgatory. They can see the things that we can all see, not saying it's inevitable, but that there's a direction of travel, and they're not quite sure how to deal with that. And as those of us want to see change, what do we need to do to kind of help them?
Well, that form of isolation can be very debilitating, and certainly can produce reactionary politics as opposed to what you might regard as more strategically kind of based scenarios. I mean, if you consider the difference, for instance, with Peter Robinson in his time and Gavin Robinson at the present time, you can see that there is no processing, and it's almost like a day-to-day kind of, he feels that he has to kind of lead from the front. Well, that, is a pale imitation of the vintage kind of Ian Paisley. I mean, he didn't have very, he had no great depth of political analysis in the early days, but he knew what he liked and he knew what he didn't like, and he could play with both. I think Robertson is probably taking his lead from that type of politics. Now, I don't know if we can genuinely do anything about that, but I think if independent of whether we can or not, or being certain of whether we can or not, I think we should still attempt to set out the offer to future, to kind of explain what guarantees can be given for every citizen, irrespective of where they were born or their political or their religious affiliation. Set it out and stand by the commitments. I have this kind of vision, whether it ever happens or not. When you think of the story of the history of the tricolour, and the green, white, and orange, and the white signifying the attempt to reach out, whatever. The flag that I would like to see, if we get that stage, is take away the big panel, have two equal panels, green and orange.
Just Donegal.
I have a lot of good stunts, Presbyterians in Donegal. But the point I'm making is, and it's really just an analogy to where we should be going. Equality has to be the cornerstone. And the Irish government are not contributing to that by holding to their chest whatever calculations, whatever assessments they have made of the costs and the consequences and the circumstances and the constitutional changes that will have to be made to facilitate unity. But we're going to get there, and we're going to have to start to work, and we should be doing it already.
And it is the case, isn't it, that unionist leaders are often just not really representative of the unionist people. In fact, there's two jobs I think we have to do. One is with the winter referendum, but with the one on the north and the south, they're two different things. But just take the north. That just actually requires convincing lots of alliance voters, really. But if we want to build a nation that you talked about, we actually have to bring unionism with us. Even if they don't vote for it, we have to bring a lot of them to feel more and more comfortable. We've done some, through the New Ireland Commission, we've done some focus group, but just talking to basically alliance voters, people who aren't sure what they want to do, and they're worried about the health service, worried about pensions. They don't like Stormont very much. But when you begin to answer those questions, they're totally and utterly convincible. I mean, I genuinely think this is a much easier thing in terms of winning a referendum than people might think. But you're 100% right, we have to actually make it absolutely clear for those people as to what they're voting for, or else they just panic. And what we've found in referendums before is people, if they don't know what it looks like, sort of panic and don't vote in the way they might if they did. The other sort of big element in this, beyond our own government in Dublin and unionism, is the British government. We can talk about the current situation in London right now, but looking forward, and if we're talking within the next 5-10 years, where do you think they're at? How difficult will they be when the time comes? Or, as I suspect, will they talk a lot to Dublin, work most of it out, and when they call a referendum, they'll actually have it, and it'll actually be in their interests to see it pass at that point?
Well, I think you've set it out. If we take a look at the existing structures and procedures in Stormont, I mean, the unions could walk out in the morning and collapse it. Even if a majority of the MLAs there would want to keep it going. That's not even good for unionism, but it doesn't rule out the possibility that that's what they would do, that they would opt for mayhem as a first resort. My sense of it is that if we can overcome the reluctance to, just to kind of talk turkey, be straight, set out the strengths of unity, set out the challenges and the difficulties with it, examine and talk, on an honest and open basis with experts like Ben Collins on an all-Ireland health service, on all-Ireland education, transportation, economy, etc., etc. I think those kind of conversations would be better if they were sponsored and led by the whatever administration was in Leinster House. But even if that isn't the case, I do think that that's a conversation that could start anyway that will eventually draw them in. I mean, the Irish government weren't exactly quite coming forward at times in the 1990s, but when they did, it was a tipping point kind of moment. I think that we should be kind of reminding them about that, and quite happy to accept their sponsorship and leadership of the process of convincing unionists that there is a life in a united country, and that the necessary kind of issues, constitutionally bound if necessary, can be given to the broad unionist community. I think you've got to approach them and give them something to really kind of think about, rather than at the minute them worrying that there's some kind of hell on earth ahead of them for their own past behaviour.
So just in terms of, we'll wrap this up. You've set out a challenge, I think, and we're both trying to set this challenge out, but people, we're both kind of very ingrained in our own political parties, and have been, when you're in a political party, you're kind of, that's your team and you're part of that. But I think both of us recognise that there's something beyond that, and bigger than that, and more important than that in a lot of ways, and that we've reached this moment of opportunity. How, given your experience, can we find a way of making people still, in the SDLP or Sinn Féin or Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael or Labour or whatever, still holding those positions and being able to have their daily battles that they have to have in Stormont or Doire, but also finding mechanisms for actually beginning to do the work and to build a movement for change and to win at the end of the day?
Well, my own thoughts on that, and I'm not saying I won every argument that I've had on this kind of approach, is that we shouldn't kind of reach too far ahead of our ability to deliver. That means in engagements across the communities, and they're going to want, your party's doing it, our party's doing it, and there is in fact information, valuable information. There's insights from people who, like Claire Mitchel and as I say, Dan Collins, they have information and they could actually educate us. But I think a platform that was based on a limited number of agreed principles, I would say strategic objectives, we used to call them in Champagne, and you never had any more than 9 or 10. You could have less than that. But it meant that there was a kind of a map, a road map, that everybody was following. That eventually starts then to bring work and relationships to the fore, and an element of trust and confidence in people. I think that there's none of that actually happening at the present time. One of the things that distresses me about it is that if you look at the Leinster House elections, the two civil war parties came together to keep Sinn Féin out. And then when that wasn't sufficient, they started buying in all the independents that they could, still to keep us out. And what has that got to do with United Ireland? So I'm trying to convince our people that there's other more practical, it don't mean more subtle, but more practical ways of getting common ground.
Maybe more subtle too.
So, just to finish, I think set a limited number of achievable objectives and then commit ourselves to them.
I think that's a challenge that's worth listening to and worth picking up for all of us involved in politics, all of us involved in what I think is the next phase of politics. We've been through the peace process, we've been through the bedding down the peace process. We now have a whole generation of young people who are extremely frustrated and hungry for change. And this is the city that always starts in. So I think it's worth listening to what Mitchel has said tonight. And thanks very much to the Trust and for all your support.
It gives me great pleasure, and I'm sure it gives Amy great pleasure as well, to present two tokens of our appreciation to both Mitchel. So, you're a minute welcome.